The prior many modules have introduced you to some cybersecurity leadership principles. I just want to remind you what those are before we continue with a couple more principles. First one we talked about was how communication is vital to effective cybersecurity. Leaders need to be able to communicate about cybersecurity. We also talked about opportunities for new businesses and how leaders can be thinking about business leaders, small business leaders, large business leaders that are entrepreneurial focused could be thinking about ways that they could create new businesses. And we even had you identify several businesses that might be created, as well as a specific business that you might be interested in creating. We also talked about law and the value of understanding the law and being familiar with the law and knowing what to do when law violations occur of various sorts of laws. We also talked about the need to lead by example and that business leaders and organizational leaders need to practice safe cybersecurity as well as preach it. We also talked about the value of being aware about risk and how leaders need to be aware of what risk is there in terms of cybersecurity. And related to that, we talked about the need for leaders to balance security expenses with goals and profit. There are certain things that leaders can do to make their organization more safe, but at what cost and at what risk? They need to figure these things out. Well, we also talked about open door policies are bad on the network, that we need to make sure that our system's safe. We also we left off there. And so what I want to talk about next is the need to reward cybersecurity practices. And we talked before about how if people violate these policies, that there needs to be some sort of response, some sort of activity by their supervisor to point out that they need to be safer in their use of data and their use of the cyber technology. But let's also realize that punishment by itself may not be enough to promote safe cyber practices in a business or in an organization. There are different things that businesses can do to encourage and reward cybersecurity practices. One of them is simply recognition. Promoting recognition and recognizing people or programs or initiatives that support safe cybersecurity practices. At Old Dominion University, we actually created T-shirts to give to every single incoming freshman that came to us this year and next year. And these T-shirts include a list of things that students should do to stay safe online. In this sense, the recognition was about promoting understanding among students, but planning is underway about how we might actually reward those students who wear their T-shirts at certain times through some sort of additional recognition. Monetary awards might also be used, and so cybersecurity practices, however they might be designed, businesses may want to come up with innovate or encourage their workers to come up with innovations in safe cybersecurity practices and reward them through monetary awards for those employees that come up with the best suggestions for securing the cyber environment. Also promotions, whether it's a promotion for individuals who are doing things that support the goals and mission of the organization and the business, but also those that are advancing in terms of the safe cybersecurity practices. Job titles can also be ways that cybersecurity practices can be rewarded, particularly within the IT unit and within the organization where the cybersecurity efforts are ongoing. I talked to a business leader once who he said he won't hire interns. What he hires are, he calls the students security specialists or security deputies, or some language like that, because they said the word intern doesn't reward the students for what they're doing. It presumes that they're not, they may lack the experience that he wants, but he developed this job title just as a way of rewarding them and encouraging them to learn in his organization, because that would place the students in a better position for seeking additional employment if they say that they had been employed as part-time security deputies or security specialists in this particular organization. Another thing that can be done to reward cybersecurity practices is to give those that are doing the cybersecurity oversight, the IT staff, the chief security officer, give them time with the cabinet, with the CEO, time with the vice presidents, so they can share the information about ongoing cybersecurity initiatives, ongoing cybersecurity efforts, but also just the value of listening to them and learning from the chief security officers, and then deciding and making decisions about how to enhance cybersecurity based upon that cabinet time. Giving them a seat at the table goes a long way for cybersecurity professionals, and it pays off in the long run. And indeed, it's often been said that everyone just wants to be heard, nothing more, nothing less. Well, with our security professionals, if those that are providing that security are being given a voice and being listened to, that is going to reward cybersecurity practices in an organization. Another principle, it's been suggested that leaders in a business and organization would do themselves well to ask their chief information security officer certain questions, so that the leader, whoever those leaders are, whatever stage they have in the organization, the business, to demonstrate that they do want to know certain things about how businesses are operating in terms of cybersecurity. Simple question is whether or not we're in compliance. Is the organization and the business in compliance with the state and federal rules and regulations and laws, and as well as whatever administrative laws might exist? Another question that has been suggested is to ask the Chief Information Security Officer, where are the biggest risks? Because that officer should know where the risks are. That Chief Information Security Officer should know. If they don't know, then the leader, the organizational leaders, may want to rethink how they're going about doing their cybersecurity. It's also important to ask them how effective are training programs. And again, the answer can be very informative. Particularly if they say they're not effective, then we need to know what we can be doing to make them more effective. If they say that they don't know the answer, that's probably just as bad as saying they're ineffective. And it may even be a worse answer, because it's suggesting that they don't value the training enough to assess it. Asking if we spend enough on cybersecurity helps to get at that question about balancing risk and balancing goals and balancing resources and those sorts of things. The Chief Information Security Officer would also be helpful in demonstrating the precise strategies that should be used to hire employees, and the types of checks that should be done on employees, and what types of information should be searched and used to determine who to hire. These Chief Information Security Officers could also be very helpful in telling the organizational leaders how to respond during a breach. Now, the leader shouldn't wait until a breach occurs to ask this question, how will we respond during a breach? So the leader should be asking it somewhat routinely and regularly, not every day, maybe not even monthly, but enough so that it's on top of mind, so that when it does happen, they know how to respond. Another valuable question is to ask what the C-suite can do to enhance security. What can the cabinet members, what can the chief executive officer and the direct reports to that officer do to promote cybersecurity in that particular business? And then it's also valuable to ask and to be familiar with the trends that we're seeing. And so I would suggest that the leaders, organizational leaders and department leaders and unit leaders simply ask the Chief Information Security Officer, what are these trends? Now, there was a student that worked with me from Mississippi State for a research, undergraduate research experience, Abby Kepto, where Abby explored the temporal patterns for breaches and hacks against businesses. And this was particularly interesting to me and to Abby and other colleagues who were working with us. But one thing she found was that these hacks occurred or were reported most often between January and March. And when you look at these data, you see that, in fact, there are twice as many reported in January than in December. Now, this data came from across the U.S., and it came from the Privacy Clearinghouse organization that has information available, and we'll talk more about how you could access that information because it is valuable for us to know. But there were also some regional differences that Abby's research uncovered, and working with Abby, we found that the West California in particular drove up the number of hacks, and that perhaps it was the Silicon Valley type area and the number of businesses there that are supported technologically. But the Northeast was in a pretty strong second. Now, I want to come back to the hacks that were reported in each month. We simply don't know why more hacks were reported in January than in any other time during the year. Abby and I came up with a number of possible explanations, and we certainly welcome any thoughts that you might have as you take our Cybersecurity Technology and Society class. One of the thoughts was that maybe behavior is different in the December and November and December, and people do the hacks in November, December, and then they get reported in January. Because there isn't, just because they're reported in January doesn't mean they happened in January. And just as, say, criminologists know that murders go up in the summer months, perhaps hacks go up in other times of the year. Maybe it's that. Another option is that the businesses have a certain amount of time they can wait when they're required to report. And it could be that they're simply waiting until the beginning of a new year to report, so that it may impact their numbers a little bit differently. If they're having a high rate of incidents or things that they don't want to report, if they can delay it to the next fiscal year or next calendar year, that may be a determining factor. Again, we just don't know what's happening here, but it is a trend that we certainly want to think about and wonder if we need to have up our security game in the fall months. In businesses that do retail, they tend to hire more security officials to walk the retail floor in the months of November and December, because there are more people shopping. Or maybe more people are online, and that's increasing the hacking in those months. Again, we don't know, but it's a trend that we'd want to think about. There are other findings that Abby's research found were that some of these patterns varied across organizations. Phishing was more common in business, education, and government organizations, and then ransomware was the most common. Ransomware was the most common in medical organizations. The financial businesses, those had the phishing, and the government organizations had phishing more. But again, these trends, it's important that businesses are aware of these trends, leaders are aware of these trends, and it's important that chief information security officers tell business leaders these trends when they're asked about them.